All right, here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Dan Norton Show. Today, I am here with Carson Hughes. Now, I'm not sure I should have introduced the show like that because Carson has a YouTube channel of his own, so we're kind of co-equal hosts on this. So he might as well just say welcome to the Carson Hughes Show or whatever he does for his channel. But anyways, I'm Dan Norton, and I'm here with Carson Hughes. So I've got a YouTube channel. So I guess this is more for Carson's audience. I'm at youtube.com/Dan Norton1, or if you search for Selfishness Project, that's an easy way to find my channel. I'm a big supporter of Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, and somehow or other, Carson got in touch with me, and he said he was interested in having a conversation, and we decided for this call we would talk about abortion. So that's a little about me and my background, and now I'll throw it over to Carson.
All right. Before I say a few things, this is asking me to get permission from you to hit record. So if you could do that while I talk, and then I'll hit record. But also, if I am unable to hit record, I'm not worried. But yeah, my name is
Okay,
Carson
I'm looking
Hughes.
for the permission request thing. I don't see anything right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not too worried. It just said to ask the person to give permission. So I don't know if it's just something you would go in and do.
Oh, it's telling you to ask for permission?
Correct. Yeah.
Is there a button it's giving you to press that like activates that request?
It's not. It's not. But yeah, if you look around and find it, that's great. And if not, while I'm saying a few things, no worries.
Okay.
So yeah, my name's Carson Hughes. I have a YouTube channel. I'm very passionate about politics and philosophy. I'm currently doing some writing on the topic. But unlike Dan, I am not a PhD in philosophy, so I am not. I am only educated by my own reading. So I do. I read as often as I can, and I also like Ayn Rand, and I'm a fan of objectivism. And anyways, yeah, I like to do talks on various different topics, and I actually used to be pro-choice, and I'm currently leaning very pro-life. And I'm looking forward to this conversation to see if maybe I can be convinced of something that I'm not. And I'm very interested in challenging your ideas that I've heard on other debates you've had. So, yeah.
All right, sounds good. So I guess let's get into that. I have done 2 debates on abortion, one maybe a year and a half ago with Tim Seiler, and then another one more recently, just a month or so ago with Harley Dalton. And both of those are on my channel, and I think the latter is the one that you saw. So I'm pretty flexible in how we get into this topic. So if you have a certain angle you want to come in at it with, that's fine. Otherwise, I can say some things to start us off. But
yeah, so if you don't have the preference of starting it off, my main focus is I wanted to understand more of your ideas on a person becoming a human by being individuated. And so I guess my initial question, well, I guess for anybody that hasn't seen other debates of yours on this topic, do you want to explain why you feel this makes somebody a human?
Okay, so I think so. What I said in my last debate and emphasized a lot is I think that something is a human once it becomes individuated, which a fetus or an embryo is not. It's just inside the mother. And as for why I use that, I cited what I refer to as concept formation. So Ayn Rand has a book called Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, which I happen to have a copy of right here. And she talks about how we form concepts that we use, whether it's man or table or any other concepts. And there's a lot that could be said about it. But I think what goes into our formation of this concept, like as babies, we just look out at the world and we don't already have this idea of man or human or tree or rock or anything else, but we acquire these concepts over time. And how does that happen? Well, I think with the case of, let's just say table, that's one of the examples she uses. It's because we see different things in the world that have something similar about them as opposed to other things. So you might see a round table, a square table, a wooden table, a plastic table, and they have all these variations, yet there's still something similar about all these things, in virtue of which we call them all tables, as against something like
Mhm.
chairs or sofas or other items of furniture, which have a somewhat different structure, and there's variations among those as well. And I think likewise with the concept man, how do we form this concept? Well, we see things in the world like you, Carson Hughes, right now, and like me and other people walking around. And we notice a similarity between these things as opposed to things like dogs and cats and trees. And in virtue of that similarity that we observe among the things that we call humans, that's how we get this concept human. It's to pick out these things in the world. And at first, at least, uh, that concept I don't think extends to things like a fetus or an embryo. You can't even see it. So of course you're not going to say, oh, well, something like Carson Hughes right now reminds me or resembles a zygote. So I'm going to group
Mhm.
them under the same term and call them both man. No, that's not something a child would do. It can't even see the zygote or the embryo or the fetus. So at least at first, it wouldn't group that thing under the concept human or man. Now, maybe
Mhm.
you can make an argument that although it doesn't at first group something like that under the concept man, you could later be justified in doing so. Now, I don't think so. I think it makes more sense to just have a different concept once you learn about the zygote or the fetus or the embryo, and just use those concepts,
Mhm.
zygos, embryo, fetus, and preserve the concept human in the way you initially got it, just by seeing things like you and I. And
Mhm.
so that's a little about what I mean when I say through the concept formation process, we have this term man, and it applies to certain things, but not other things. But I'll just
For
pause
sure.
there and throw it back to you.
Okay. Yeah. So I have one silly question that might just get a really short answer, and then I have the main question. But could you describe everything about one person that makes them individuated? Like what are all the things, which I'm guessing it wouldn't need to be much, but you, what is everything that you could explain of why you are individuated?
I think the main idea is just physical separation. So you're not inside of somebody else. You would not be separated from somebody else. In that case, you would not be individuated. So in a way, separation is, I don't know if it's an exact synonym of individuation, but maybe
Mhm.
it conveys more of what the idea is.
Okay.
So if you
But there's nothing else to it. It is the separation itself. I
pretty
think that's accurate. I'm
much,
just curious if you
yeah,
have a different take on it. Okay.
no,
So if you have a baby, let's say a baby is born early, it's like eight, woman's pregnant for 8.5 months, baby's born early. We got this baby. It's by itself. Umbilical cord's cut. You're holding this baby. This baby's individuated, right?
yeah.
Okay. And then you're individuated. That mother is individuated. So I guess my question is, when the baby is connected to the mother, what makes the baby less individuated than the mother? I feel like once a woman's pregnant, by these terms you're using, that would make the woman not individuated anymore.
Well, if you have someone growing inside of you, I don't, I think what that doesn't count against your individuation, but if you are growing inside of somebody else, I think it does. I think you can survive in a way that the fetus can't. So
Mhm.
the mother doesn't need that thing growing inside of it in order to survive. The
Mhm.
the fetus does need to be growing inside of the mother in order to survive. So she's her own entity in a way that I think the fetus is not.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that exactly picks out the most important or fundamental aspect of it, but I wouldn't say that she's not individuated because she has a fetus inside her.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering about the definition of the separation part. Because if you could take two things that you would call a human and then they're not separated, why one versus the other? I do see the reason for leaning towards one, especially when it comes to rights. I'd give rights to one more so than the other. But another thing that I would wonder is if you look, because the response to that was that the baby needs the mother. Now the baby, let's just call it a baby for fun, or fetus, whatever. The fetus a day before it's born it needs to be out to survive, but at that point, it doesn't need the mother to survive. So I guess that's one comment. And then the other comment would be, the living aspect matter? So if you have a baby the day before it's born and a mother, and let's say the mother gets killed and the baby didn't die yet. I don't know how long people have to get a baby out of a dead mom, but let's say a baby can like hang out in a dead mom for an hour. Does the death of the mother make it individuated? And if not, and it's the removing it from the mother, then my question would be, is there an argument for saying, hey, let's not remove it because it isn't anything of value yet, because it isn't a human?
This is a case I haven't thought about. So the mother gets killed and the baby can last for an hour, and there's a question as to what should be done with it. Maybe in this case, just thinking off the top of my head, the decision would revert to the father if the father is around, and I guess he would be the next most plausible person to have a say over what should happen with the fetus, which is almost a person, but not yet, I would say, or
What?
almost a
Why would
human being.
he? Why would he have any say? I wonder. Like, just because, if you have the idea that because it's not a human and it's inside of somebody, that person can have its rights to have that thing terminated, removed, anything from itself because it's violating its own rights. But I don't see how rights would, especially to a non-human, would connect to something just because it's got the same, blood. And yeah.
I'm not sure I followed your question there.
There's I do follow the idea of a pregnant person. If you are calling what's inside the person not human, that person has rights to remove a tumor, it can remove a parasite, and let's say it could remove a fetus. So that right makes sense. But if the mother dies and you just have a fetus inside, it, especially if we're looking at it as not even a human, it's not a human unless it gets removed. Why would there be a person on Earth that would be able to make that decision outside of the law making the decision? The law could say, we view this as a human, so therefore save it because the mother's dead and the mother doesn't have rights anymore. Or you could view it as not a human, and then in all cases you just leave it alone because nobody owns that woman's body. I just don't see the connection there logically.
Well, so one thing you said in there was the law could view it as a human. I am not convinced that would be correct because I don't think it's individuated yet if it's still in the mother. And I think of being individuated as a necessary condition of being a human, if not a sufficient condition. But as to, why should anyone have a say? I mean, it's kind of it's a very unusual case. So I guess it's not obvious, but I guess I'm just thinking like, well, who is the most responsible for this thing's existence other than the mother? So if the mother is out of the picture, well, it seems like the next person who would be most responsible for its existence would be the father. So why not say he's the one who's got to say in what happens to it?
That
I
that
can't think.
does that does make some sense if we were to put some kind of value on it. Like if we view this thing that we know has the potential to be a human, if we're calling it not a human because it's not individuated, but there's some kind of value we give it for having that potential. Are we giving it value, and is it just because the mother is dead? Or yeah.
Well, I don't know that it is. It's an issue of value. I mean, the father might not want the fetus. He might not want a son or a daughter, and so maybe he would decide, let's just kill this thing, or let it die on its own inside the mother who's already dead. Or if he really wanted a child, maybe this was his dream in life, or just one of his big goals in life was to have a child, then in that case, that father might have a lot of value on the fetus and say, let's get it out.
Gotcha.
And it's kind of like, I mean, other, I don't think a person is property, but maybe it's the next closest concept we could use in this concept. Like if if you've got a car, well, if you're responsible for bringing that car into existence, then you have a say over what's done with it in the world. And maybe someone else had a greater role in, or played a greater role in bringing this car into existence. But if you have kind of a subsidiary role in the way that a father does with regard to a fetus, then maybe just as your subsidiary role in regard to some property would devolve onto you, if the primary person is out of the picture, then likewise in this case, it would devolve to the second most responsible person for this thing.
I agree with
yeah.
I agree with the property element, because not only do I agree on property, but I agree that children, in a sense, are the parents' property. So that makes sense. But the element I don't agree on, and I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that the mother's dead. So I don't know. So if you have a dead body, it's just hanging out there. There's nothing that makes that body mean much of anything. So if you have an alive 9-month grown fetus inside of that body, there's not much of a difference between that fetus being in there and that fetus being in a closet. Like unless we're giving that body some kind of meaning other than knowing its history. We know the history that body grew that baby, but imagine you have this dead body and it has the baby in it because it's never been born. But then you have a situation where a woman gives birth to a baby, just about the same type of baby, but then that mother dies. And for some fun hypothetical reason, we say, hey, let's put the baby back in. And you put the baby back in. Let's say the dad doesn't want the baby. It's already been born. You can't kill a born baby. So you just shove it back in. Is the fact that it's inside of a certain location affecting that?
So the idea is the baby is born to the mother is alive, she gives birth, then the mother dies, then you put the baby back in the dead mother. Is that the example?
Yeah. Does that baby lose its rights because it's inside of a human? And by rights, I actually mean protection, not rights. But
does it lose its rights? No, I don't think so. My first thought on this hypothetical, which is quite strange, but
yeah.
I guess you like those. I've watched some of your other videos, and I've noticed some. You've introduced some pretty out there hypotheticals, but going with it in this case, my first thought on it is it would probably violate the rights of the baby to try to stick it back in the dead mother, because it seems like I would guess at least that that's not the best thing for its survival.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess you would be, or for its life, maybe that would kill it if you stuffed it back in. And so yeah, I think you would be violating that baby's rights to live if you treated it in that way.
I guess I'm trying to figure out the separation between that and a dead mom with a baby inside of it, that the baby's alive. Like it's like extremely trapped in there, but I'm trying to see how it's being trapped is affecting it so badly. Like imagine a car wreck and there's a baby in there. And by the end of it, you don't even see the car anymore. You just see a pile of people and there's a bunch of dead people piled on top of a baby. I don't think that the dad of that baby should be able to say, since there's people trapping it from moving, we should let it die because I don't want a baby anymore. You would say there's an alive human that you describe as alive if you took that baby and just had it on its own. And then we're having it be encased in the dead flesh of what used to be a human. I guess I just don't see the detail that makes it not on a person to be able to save it. Or I guess before even a dad could say anything, if I knew that woman was dead and I was there and I'm all like, oh, there's a baby in here, I'm going to cut it out, and I cut it out. Should there I mean, that's way more complicated because people probably shouldn't start cutting on people that just got in a car wreck. But if in this hypothetical we knew that she was 100% dead and I cut a baby out, did I make the wrong call?
I've lost the hypothetical. Could you say briefly what it is?
Sorry, yeah, I'll just say that the element of you have a car wreck and it ends up with a pile of dead fat people on top of a baby. The
Who
baby
was
can
out
be
of its mother or
yeah, let's just say
inside?
this is a baby that was just hanging out on its own.
Okay.
And it's trapped by a bunch of people, and you could remove those people. I'm trying to see the distinction between a bunch of people on top of a baby versus a baby inside of its mother. Like it's just being trapped between flesh, and that what makes it not deserve protection if it's trapped between flesh.
Well, it sounds like in one case it's not individuated in the case where it's inside the mother, whereas if it's just got a bunch of people piled on top of it, I would say it is individuated sufficiently. I mean, you have a pile of football players, who they've been tackling each other, and you got a big pile of human beings. I wouldn't say they're not individuated in the relevant sense. Whereas I would say, if you're literally inside of another person, I would say you're not individuated in that case. So that's the sort of distinction I think I would make in this case.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably a good point to stop the individuation element. But I don't feel convinced that once the person's dead, that there's any room for argument that there's no individuation, because the difference is time. If that baby could survive for ever, then eventually that mom's gonna rot. And like there's just there's at least not another person that's removing its individuation. But it might be best to go to a different topic. I don't know.
Sure, we can go to another topic.
Okay.
Well, I mean, unless you wanted to press more on that.
Well, I guess I want to press a little more on it. Just because so you mentioned you watched some of my stuff, you saw the hypotheticals. Hopefully you don't despise hypotheticals. I think it's a good way to see where one stands, especially if you go to far extremes. But I don't know if you saw the one that I did on the amputation argument.
Is this the one with the hand and the finger inside of the
no, that one's just to show that in most cases the mother is the one that put the baby inside of herself. But no, the amputation one is basically a counter to bodily autonomy, but it's also, I think it's a counter to this individuated idea where if the fetus that's inside the mother.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
There's a helicopter going over and it's drowning out my audio, and I'm having trouble
Gotcha.
hearing you, and I think it's about out of range now, so you can continue.
Your microphone is really good because I cannot hear the helicopter, but I can hear you perfectly.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Oh, by the way, so on hypotheticals, I've wondered about that recently. Like, to what extent are they appropriate? I've used some kind of far-fetched hypotheticals recently in another context, and some people were objecting, oh, that's so unrealistic. It's actually not a hypothetical I made up, but it's one that's commonly used in online debates. Coconut Island, it's called. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a vulgar example. It's for it's a political philosophy kind of example. Well, I guess abortion is too in a way, but anyway, I guess hypotheticals, even if they're very outlandish, they can have some value. Ayn Rand has one involving an immortal robot in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, which I've got here. And actually, it's just a couple sentences. Maybe I could just quickly read.
Yeah, go for it.
It says, this is paragraph 19 of the Objectivist Ethics. She says, to make this point clear, or to make this point fully clear, the point being something about the nature of value, it is only to a living entity that things can be good or evil. It's only the concept of life that makes the concept of value possible. That's what she said in the previous paragraph. And then she says, to make this point fully clear, Try to imagine an immortal, indestructible robot, an entity which moves and acts, but which cannot be affected by anything, which cannot be changed in any respect, which cannot be damaged, injured, or destroyed. Such an entity would not be able to have any values. It would have nothing to gain or lose. It could not regard anything as for or against it, as serving or threatening its welfare, as fulfilling or frustrating its interests. It could have no interests and no goals. Now, I think that's unrealistic, especially the part where it says like it can't be affected by anything. Really?
Hmm.
So like if I put my hand between it and the sun, it doesn't even have a shadow cast on it. Its
Maybe
temperature
she
doesn't change at all. If I
maybe she
flick it, it
meant
doesn't make any
emotionally
noise.
affected. Yeah.
So, but I don't. I think she would probably grant that, but just say that's beside the point here. So,
Mhm.
I think there can be hypotheticals that do have value, and that's one for Ayn Rand, even if they're not realistic. By the way, can you hear this weed whacker outside, or is that?
No, I cannot.
Oh wow! All right, if you
Yeah.
can't, if you can't start to hear it, let me know, and I can move
Yeah.
somewhere else. It might be
Okay.
too distracting to me,
Oh,
because
gotcha.
it
But
might interfere with my ability to hear you. But anyways, for now at least, I'm okay with trying out some bizarre hypotheticals.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it, at very least it shows us where we stand. Like we can go, this will never happen in real life, so it doesn't matter, but it shows you where you stand on the topic if it did exist. So I can't think of a better way to explain it than that. But so my hypothetical with the amputation is, if bodily autonomy is the idea of why a woman can have an abortion, because it's her body, so the fetus inside is part of her body. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the level, it doesn't matter what its potential is, to the level that you can kill it, which is the furthest harm for the most part you can do to any animal, anything that's alive, is to kill it. So if you can kill it and you have the bodily autonomy to control anything in your body, then if you hired a doctor to cut you open, go inside, surgically remove the arms of this fetus, sew it up, close you up, the fetus is fine, you give birth to an armless baby. Should you be allowed to do this because it's your body, the thing inside your body is yours? And why should the potential life stop you from being able to do that, but not stop you from ending its existence?
Mm, I see. Yeah. Okay. I do remember a video where you gave an example like this, and I thought about it a little bit, and I guess my one way one might try to push back on that is to say, well, yeah, you could do that, um, if it were so you're not violating the rights of the fetus, but maybe it could be argued that you're violating the rights of the post fetus. You know, once it comes out, the baby, you've done something to undermine its survival,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe in virtue of that, you could make a case against amputating the fetus's limbs. I'm not 100% sure about that, but maybe you could argue that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Luckily,
so
nobody would want to do it.
yeah, I don't think anyone would want to do that,
but
but
I think it's a good way to examine like what we think of that thing. Why does that thing not have value? And then you have things like, if you have the fact that it's her body and it's connected, then when she gives birth, if the umbilical cord is still connected, is it still her body until the umbilical cord's cut? What if she says, don't cut that, I own that, the umbilical cord is in me, connected to me? And so it's just some interesting muddy territory, even if it doesn't affect most abortions.
the umbilical cord case, I think, is actually interesting. And an objectivist philosopher, Harry Binswanger, I think is who I heard this from. I think he's proposed that even once it's out, it's even if it's still attached to the umbilical cord, you could still end its life. And he gave the reasoning being, or what one motivation for this would be that maybe there's something you just can't catch, like it has some defect or some kind of disease
Mhm.
which you can't know while it's inside the woman. But once you get it out, you can turn it around and inspect it and say, all right, looks okay. I'm not going to have like this is not going to be a Down syndrome baby, which I have to take care of for its entire life. It
Mhm.
looks like it's going to be live a normal human life. And okay, now I'm going to cut the cord. And then at that point, it's got full rights to life. But I think
Mhm.
there is some, it does make some sense to say, all right, well, maybe it's just got some problem, which I couldn't have caught until it came out.
Mhm.
And so maybe that's the last chance you have to do something that wouldn't violate its rights by killing it.
Yeah. Well, and then you have to wonder if you could kill it because it's still connected, then what if you disconnect it and then 5 seconds later you go, oh, I caught it. I didn't catch it before, but now I caught it, but it's disconnected. Is there any difference for human to human with that connection? And I think the only connection is the individuated element.
Yeah, I guess in that case, I might just say, well, too bad. Sometimes life throws you some bad luck, and you just have to deal with it. Maybe this is the case. You got to draw the line somewhere, and
Yeah.
that seems like a reasonable place to draw the line.
Well, especially because the mother can't be harmed in any way at that point. It would just be a factor of adoption and how one I guess there'd be the emotional effect of knowing that you have offspring that exists in the world. But yeah, I don't think the mother would be harmed at that point. Um, but yeah, that's about what I had as far as that topic. Yeah. So yeah. What are your thoughts? Did you want to talk about the analogy with the rock?
Oh, we can talk about that. I guess I'm well, so I don't expect people's minds to change quickly especially on big topics like this, but
Mhm.
I guess right now I'm curious like where your mind is, um like w- is there something that I've said that has swayed you at all, or are you exactly where you were at the beginning of this call? Are you still like it would be? I'm not expecting you
Mhm.
to say, "Oh yeah, you changed my mind. I'm now
Yeah.
in favor of abortion." But if you're not in favor of abortion, I'm just curious, like what is the resistance point right now, if you could say it, or what is the defect that you see in my reasoning, such that you wouldn't want to sign on to abortion? And then whatever that is, if there is such a point, then I'd be interested to talk about that.
Yeah, so just so you know, I am very open-minded, and when I get my mind changed, I change it immediately, and I have no interest in keeping to a certain stance. And oftentimes I'll find myself just being wrong about certain topics because I've just I'm ignorant to that topic. In fact, the other day I was talking with somebody about a topic of self checkouts in stores, and I called it AI. And the person said that's not AI, and they educated me on technology. And now I realize I should have called it automation. And I'm perfectly fine with being wrong and acknowledging that. So as for this, which I get challenged on abortion stuff all the time, and I slightly adjust my viewing. Since we've only talked about the individuated element, I don't think I've been convinced necessarily, but I feel challenged, and I feel like I like thinking about it in the details. You've inspired a lot of thought from me, but the I don't think that I feel any different with the fact that it has not been disconnected from the person. Um, my original idea on what I think is the best argument for pro-choice, which is why I always was pro-choice, is that I don't think anybody owes anybody anything. If I stumbled upon you dying on the street and the only thing I had to do to save your life is pluck a beard hair out, I don't think I should legally have to. And so that's my stance on, I don't think somebody should have to take care of another person. The reason I've kind of adjusted my stance on that is I think there's a couple complications. If for almost all cases, any case that doesn't involve rape, the woman was part of choosing to put the life inside of her. But the more important reason is, I think, as a society, we have to have neglect laws. We have to have laws that are different for taking care of humans at earlier stages. And so I just haven't been convinced about that individuation as affecting it.
Okay, so you use the phrase humans at earlier stages, and I would not sign on to the idea that they are humans yet. You could say they're potential humans, but I wouldn't call them actual humans. So maybe trying to think of like what is the fundamental point of difference between us, and maybe it's at least one fundamental point is this point that they are humans. So then that could lead to the discussion of, all right, well, why call this thing a human? And I gave some kind of account as to why I use the term human in the way I do when talking about concept formation. So if the reason you're against abortion is at least partly that you regard embryos or zygotes or fetuses as humans, then I would want to know, like, why do you use human in that sort of way? And the one point I thought of is on this premise, do we have to rewrite the Guinness Book of World Records? So if I ask you, like, what is the tallest human who's ever existed? What might you answer? I'm curious.
The tallest human that ever existed. Oh,
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but
I believe it's Robert Waldo. I think he was 8'11", unless someone has
yeah.
broken his record. This was back in like the 80s or so that I learned this.
So smallest would have to be reworded to the smallest born human or something like that.
So if I then said, what is the shortest human that ever existed? You might say, all right, well, let me look it up in the Guinness Book of World Records. And you might find like there's some guy who is like 18 inches tall or something.
Ooh,
whoa, that's way too big. It should only be like 1 nanometer.
No, that's a good point. But I think the record actually is adults, which is why like a 2-year-old wouldn't be compared to, but I don't know exactly how they do it. But I get what you mean. It's like we don't start your birthday on when you were conceived, and there's various different wording. So why would I call something a human? So first of all, I think I think we have to rely on what we learn as humans, science. I've learned things over the years that I've never known, and I'm relying on the information I can gather in books or on the internet. And so what I would call a human would be the second that a stage is happening that is the natural process of somebody going through the stage of what you and I are. So sperm on its own, landing on the floor, it will never become anything. Eggs on their own will never become anything. Now I could learn something new about science I don't know. Like every time I learn different things about the fertilized egg and how long it takes to enter the uterine wall and a handful of different things. If it turns out that the sperm and the egg don't do anything, and for like 2 weeks of what we call pregnancy, they're just hanging out and there's nothing in motion that is making this new creation going, then I would like view that as not being a stage of life. A toddler is a stage of life. A teenager, you got puberty, you got all these different things, but they're different stages of what I would call humans. And so the same thing would go for any stage in motion of our species. Similar to if part of why I have moral feelings about humans is I don't want anybody to suffer from, let's say, physical pain. Our species, as we know it, can suffer from physical pain, but if there's an adult that doesn't have pain receptors and they can't feel pain, I still think I view them morally the same because they are part of the species, not because they can feel it. So that's my initial thought.
Okay. So this is reminding me, excuse me, of the rock example that I gave in my previous abortion debate, where if science developed to a point where it could turn rocks into humans, and that became part of their natural, you might call it, progression. Once you spray the rock with the human chemical, or however it's done, then
Mhm.
it's on the road to becoming a well, what I would call a human. But the issue is, would
Mhm.
you would already call it a human at that point if I follow the logic of your view.
If it's sprayed with something and it is going from one stage to another, and we can witness that stage in motion.
Sure.
Off the top of my head, I think yes. I could easily have my mind change there, but I would think we would view the rocks before sprayed the same way we might view sperm, where we now, as humans that are intelligent and have reasoning, we can recognize that the rock means nothing until it's sprayed. But yeah, that'd be interesting. I'd be very curious to see what that looked like. And I don't know if it would matter what it looked like if the spraying made it to where it was going to become a human like you or I, then I think so. What do you
Then-
think?
well, I would. This is I try to
It's
use this as a
individuated.
yeah, yeah. I try to use this as a reductio ad absurdum of the idea that the zygotes, or the embryo, just because something can become a human doesn't make it a human already at that point. And so I use this as a way of trying to push the sense that maybe there's something off about calling um, a zygote or an embryo a human at that point, by
Mhm.
taking something that is more radically different, like a rock, and just saying, assume we could just spray it with some chemical, and then but somehow scientists have got this chemical to turn that rock into a human like you and I are now. Would you call that sprayed rock
Mhm.
a human at that point, since that's now in its natural development? In my view, is no. And because I think it's not sufficient to be a human that you be in the process of turning into a being like you and I. I think you already have to be
Mhm.
um, sufficiently like you and I. Now, individuation, you say the rock is individuated. I don't think individuation is the only characteristic. So I think it's a necessary, but not a sufficient condition of
Yeah.
being a human. Like a dog, which is born, that's individuated, but it's a different species. So I
Mhm.
wouldn't call that a human. With the rock, it's individuated, but it's and even if it is going to become a being like you and I think it's not there yet.
Mhm.
Um, so it doesn't have head, arms, hearts.
Okay, well,
Uh,
okay, so let's say this rock is sprayed, and
yeah,
then over a certain amount of time, it really doesn't matter. Let's say this rock develops a full-on human head. And so half the rock is rock and half the rock is human head. And we know that in some amount of time, it doesn't matter, it could be 5 years, could be 5 days, that the rest of the rock is going to turn into a body with arms and legs. But right now, we just have half rock and a human head, and somehow this human head learns quick. The scientists made the best rock human head, and it can talk and it can reason and it can feel pain. It can want an itch scratched. How do you view this life form?
I would say it's not a human. And you reminded me of an example. That's what I'm looking at. There's a example of a rational spider that comes
Oh
up in
yeah.
Ayn Rand's book. Says, if you discovered the existence of a Martian who had a rational mind but a spider's body, would you classify him as a rational animal, i.e., as a man? That's Aristotle's traditional definition of a man. It's the rational animal. So what
Yeah.
if we find this rational spider? Would we call that a man? And her answer is no. Um, in the case of the rational spider from Mars, if such a creature were possible, the differences between him and man would be so great that the study of one would scarcely apply to the other, and therefore the formation of a new concept to designate the Martians would be objectively mandatory. So, although there is one significant similarity there's just so much different about it in normal things we already call man that she says, we should create a new category for it and not call it a man. Likewise, in your case, if something's got a head of a baby and the rest of it is rock, there's something significantly similar to it in us, but there's also a lot significantly different.
Yeah.
And I think so different that it would justify using a different term, not just a straight on man. Maybe call it a rock man, hyphenated or something.
Yeah. And terms are complicated, but to respond to the spider thing. So this is an element that I would like to learn more about in life, which is how we separate species. So I don't know. So I know that I believe most humans are part Homo sapien, part Neanderthal. But I don't know if Homo habilis had the ability to, sorry, I worded that strangely. Well, anyways, so Homo habilis, I don't know if had the ability to reason and rationalize things and communicate, but let's say that's the case. I have not researched as much, and let's say Neanderthal, we definitely know that's the case, and then hybrids of which is most of us, of Homo sapiens and Neanderthal, can do the same thing. I don't know the detail that led scientists to decide these have different names. So in my mind, if I was trying to figure out how to live alongside these people, my go-to would be the idea of, I don't kill you, you don't kill me. I don't punch you, you don't punch me. You'd create laws based on these ideas. So coming up with the name to call something for our convenience, and then separately coming up with a name to call something for its scientific value if we create science, is its own thing. So yeah, I would say that a spider with a human head, I don't know if that was part of it, but that could rationalize things. I have no interest in calling it a human, but would I live alongside it like a human if, for one, I had reason to trust it, and for two, if it would agree to the rules of the society? So I don't know if that changes much, but those are my thoughts initially on that.
Okay. I had a couple thoughts on what you've just said. So one is there's a distinction between the scientific and the philosophic definition of a term. So when Aristotle says man is the rational animal, this is someone writing in, the 4th century Athens or Greece, and science hasn't developed nearly as much as it has to now. And I think if you just say rational animal, that's sufficient in a normal context of distinguishing, cats and dogs and fish on the one hand, and beings like you and I on the other. Now, as science advances and we discover these finer shades of difference between human habilis and Homo sapiens and Homo erectus or whatever, Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon man, I don't know all the different ones that scientists have found, but when you come up with a scientific definition, then you might want to modify it a little bit. But I think just for general common philosophical purposes, when you're not dealing with a specialized context, then I think rational animal is sufficient as a definition. But with the so that was one point. Now the rational spider, so it's got the body of a spider, but it has reasoning capabilities. That's kind of like the rational mosquito example, which came up in my previous debate with Harley. And I also wouldn't call that a man, because I think it's sufficiently different that despite its possession of rationality, we should still come up with a different term for it. But as to like how we should relate to it, if, as I said in that debate, like if it survived by sucking the blood of humans and all it did was cause problems for humans and didn't provide any value in the way that we can get value from other human beings, like, you and I can trade. I can go to a grocery store, give them money, they can give me food. We can have these mutual win-win kind of relations. If it's a species that I can have win-win relationships with, then I guess there is a grounds for respecting rights, because I think rights are egoistic. That's the point of rights, in my view. Following Ayn Rand's view, she's an egoist. If it's in our interest, our long-term interest, to have this relationship of not using force against another being, then we should institute this principle where we don't use force against each other. But if it's a kind of species where, let's say, it is rational, but the only way for it to survive is to be in conflict with us and make our lives worse, that sort of rational being, I would say, no, we shouldn't respect its rights, because and to do so would be altruistic or self-sacrificial. And since I think egoism makes sense, we should live in a way that benefits ourselves. In that sort of case, I would say don't respect its rights. So it just depends on how
Yeah.
we fill in the details of the hypothetical.
Oh, I agree with you. It's why when I watch movies like X-Men and everybody's saying, "Oh, we should treat the superheroes like equals," I'm like, in this world, I'm scared of those guys. They can do a lot of wild things that aren't what I'm used to humans agreeing to do or not do. So yeah, it does become complicated. I would say one thing that's interesting is words. So I mean, I think we could probably both agree that humans create words to figure out how to communicate. So if somebody has a different definition for what something means or what they think it should mean, like if you feel like human should mean once you're individuated, you're a human, and I feel like human should be, let's say, conception through your death, then we just have different meanings for the word we're using. Similar to some people, when they talk about racism, they just mean the idea of one person talking negatively or calling their own race superior to another one. But then if somebody says, "Oh, you have to have the power dynamic in there," the fact that people have different definitions, I don't think necessarily needs to affect how the conversation goes on it. And that would make my argument just go to, okay, let's ignore the idea of the word human. Let's just take a made up word like ZERP. And then so you use the word human to mean somebody individuated, where I use the word ZERP to mean anything from the level you're talking about, individuated through death, and anything from conception up until the individuated. And that's called a ZERP to me. And I think that the ZERPs should be protected in a society that wants to show that its goals are to protect ZERPs.
Yeah. So I guess you're raising the issue of, or the question maybe in some people's minds, of whether language is subjective. Is it just arbitrary how we use words? I don't think it is. I think that's a big part of what Ayn Rand's book on epistemology is, and part of the reason she calls her philosophy objectivism is she thinks there are objective ways of forming concepts as opposed to subjective ways, and also as opposed to what she calls intrinsic ways. There's this trichotomy that runs throughout her analysis of many issues. There's the intrinsic school of thought, which says, it's just inherent in the nature of reality, apart from human choices in the mind, that we should call things humans or not. And then there's subjective view, which says, no, it has nothing to do with the facts of reality. We just arbitrarily choose to use terms in the way that we do. And then there's the objective view, which in her sense of that term, it means, no, there's facts of reality, but they have to cohere with or integrate with the nature of the human mind. So it wouldn't be useful to us humans to have a concept that integrates, let's say, dogs and leaves and the shade of green on the patio umbrella that I see about 5 feet from me right now. Just those three things, nothing else in the universe. And I'm going to create this term ZERP to pick out just those things. Now, is that a useful concept to have, to carry to some cognitive weight in my mind as I'm going through the world? I think she would say no. It's a useless kind of grouping to make, as opposed to, say, the concept tree. We come across these sorts of things all the time. It's a very useful concept. It takes a cognitive load off of our shoulders, so to speak, to have this one term to refer to all these millions or billions of things in the world. So some terms do useful cognitive work, some don't. Some clutter our thinking, some clarify our thinking. And depending on whether a term does that, whether it helps our thinking process and our engagement with the world or not, we can decide whether it's a valid term.
Yeah.
So I guess in the case of ZERP, we would have to decide, well, is it is it useful to have a concept that integrates
Mhm.
both anything from conception all the way through someone who's lived 80 years and then dies? And if it is useful, is it also useful to have another concept that only starts integrating things from birth to death?
Mm.
And maybe both of those concepts could be useful. And there's also further questions of, well, how do these integrate with rights? Maybe it is useful to have a concept like ZERP, but rights don't apply to ZERPs. They only apply to things that
Mm.
are post-birth. And, we could have an argument about that. But those are some of the
Yeah.
considerations that came to mind when you were describing this term ZERP.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I actually get bothered by it all the time when I'm talking to people about language. People will say language changes, so you got to go along with it. And I'll say language can change, but it's up to each of us to decide what words we want to use. When people are encouraged to say using like they them as a singular pronoun, or doing neopronouns, or one thing that bothers me a lot, and I've done some deep dives on it, is asexual has always meant that they are not sexual, similar to atheist means no God, but it's changed. Asexual, a lot of people have changed it to meaning little to no sex, which would be funny if people change atheist to little to no God. But so asexuals, there'll be groups of them where they'll have a bunch of different like side branch names, and I think those are nonsense. I've analyzed all of what each of them mean, and I think they're nonsense, but some people like them, and there are thousands of people that use them in their day-to-day language, and I don't want to stop anybody from using what they use. So language will morph based on what we all decide together on how to communicate. But I mostly think you're right. I think I think a lot of people get hung up on the words, and they'll say, I think this human should be defended. And then the response is, that's not a human yet. Where maybe the best approach is for me to say is, why shouldn't we protect the fetus? Just the fetus. Like, I don't need to call it a human. I can just say the day before it's born, let's analyze what about it shouldn't be protected. Do we care about morals? And if we want to go that route, I guess I will ask you is, even though I think, and I'm guessing you think, that the main reason to protect humans has nothing to do with specifically morals, I think it plays a part. So if there is a human or a non-human that can suffer, do we want to look at that suffering element?
Okay, so the a few thoughts
Sorry
here.
about that. I rambled a lot right there.
No, that's all right. Uh, so so you're saying, well, let's say I grant it's a fetus. Why not protect the rights of or why not give the fetus rights? I guess that's kind of what you're one point you're raising. So I think that raises the question of what is the point of rights?
Mhm.
And in my view, following Rand, I think the point of rights is to help individual humans, individuated humans, which I think is a redundant term, but I don't want to beg the question. So I'll put the adjective in front of the noun. I think the point is to enable individuated humans to survive and flourish in a peaceful way together, in a mutually beneficial way. So I think the
Mhm.
issue of rights primarily comes up with, uh, let's say, adults, and how should they interact? Is it better
Mhm.
for us to trade with each other by voluntary consent, or should I just be able to come and punch you and rob you and rape you, murder you, and do whatever I need to coerce you in order to survive? And I think the right answer is that we should not coerce each other. We should engage in a voluntary sort of way. So
Mhm.
the point of rights is to enable individuals to uh, act together. So the issue of rights wouldn't really come up on a desert island if you're just all by yourself.
Mhm.
But once you add another person to that island, now there's a question, all right? How should we relate to each other? Should I try to make you my slave? Or should I try to offer you something of value? Like, all right, you work on building the shelter and I'll work on catching some fish. And then we can trade with
Mhm.
each other to mutual benefit. And
Yeah.
I think that is the point of rights. It's to help individuals do better when they're living together. And
Hmm.
since I don't regard the fetus as an individual yet, I don't think the issue of rights, I think, is just not applicable to it yet. It's kind of outside the context of what the purpose of rights is, which is
For,
to allow individuals to interact well.
yeah, no, that makes sense. I would say on the island with the one person, realistically, if you're stronger, you're probably better off if you turn that person into a slave and keep them in mind for a possible future meal. But when it's not just two of you, if you get a group of thousands together to live in a society and you're creating ideas of laws and why you would even have laws, I definitely agree with everything you just said. I think the idea is for adults, it's you don't kill me, I don't kill you. So anybody capable of killing. And as far as the mutual as far as the value that can come from it, I think that's complicated of if you gain anything, but I think the value of having the protection. I don't know if you view rights and protection the same. I don't know if it's just but anyways, so I think that the idea of protection is important. And so that's probably a good way to look at abortion anyways, is to even see why we protect humans. And so I would say, you don't kill me, I don't kill you. That's our main rule. No killing in this society. Okay, so what about somebody that can't kill somebody? So you could say somebody that's like disabled. Does that person matter? So one reason you would want to say that you would just protect all adult humans would be that if you say as soon as somebody is unable to kill, therefore they can't play a role in the mutual benefit, you don't kill me, I don't kill you, is they won't want to join if they know that as soon as they become incapable, they can be killed. So you got to factor them in. And then you got kids. So you got this idea of if a mother has 4 kids and she feels like she can't feed them all, so she wants to kill one of her kids just because she doesn't want to see her kids suffer. I'm curious to hear your stance on this, but my stance would be on a very basic level society with no foster care, adoption, none of that stuff. Unlike if an adult killed an adult, which that person should go to jail probably for life. If a parent chose to kill its child that isn't partaking in the mutual benefit of you don't kill me, I don't kill you, I think you have to let that slide. Do you agree with that?
Well, if I'm not sure if it's an implication of what you're saying, but if the implication is that a there's not a reason, at least on my view, not to kill a child, I would no, I would say no. I don't agree with that. But I do think the case of children is maybe trickier than the case of
Mhm.
adults. It's um but I think maybe the reason for uh having a prohibition against killing children is not exactly the same reason as in the case of adults. I'm not sure
Mhm.
about this. I do think it's a little bit trickier.
Yeah, well,
Um,
for example, I guess what I mean is, so if I was in nature and there's no society and I saw a person kill another person and I knew I could kill the person that killed the other person, I would do it. But if I saw a mother killing one of her 4 kids, and let's say I happened to know that she was doing it because she thought she couldn't keep them all fed, but she's going to feed the other ones, I would think if I kill her as what I'm viewing as taking this bad person out of existence, then I have to decide, okay, am I going to take care of her other 3 kids? So I would imagine what's ideal in a society that doesn't have certain setups, that you have to accept that without advancements like we have now, there might be cases where somebody has to eliminate their offspring that cannot make their own choices like adults can.
okay, if you're talking about a case where there's just not enough resources, food to support everyone, then I think that unlike society today in the West, at least, um, is what we might call a lifeboat or emergency situation, which Rand talks about. She has an article called "The Ethics of Emergencies," where she
Mm,
shows how the normal rules of ethics are not meant to apply. So it can be justified to coerce someone. For instance, if you're on a lifeboat, if there's a lifeboat that can only hold one person, but there's two people on it, are you justified in using force against the other person? Like normally she says, no, don't use force against people. That violates their rights. But in an emergency situation, a lifeboat situation, it could be justified. So I think in the kind of case you're describing where there's just not enough food for everyone, maybe it's actually best to put one of your children to death, as tragic as that would be. And it would be justified in that case. But we don't live in that sort of scenario. So I don't think that would carry over to normal life. Normally, I don't think it would be, but you might actually be putting it out of its misery. Like if the only option is to either starve to death and have this tortuous, long drawn out death, or just immediately put it to death, throw it off a cliff or something, so it doesn't even notice what happened, it's just gone. And maybe that's the more humane thing to do. But fortunately, we're not in that situation normally.
Well, partially I only brought it up because I'm actually doing some writing on it and the idea of mutual benefit. So I'm analyzing all the elements. But yeah, so I feel like in a society where everything's focused on mutual benefit, you're right. There's a difference with younger and older, and kids are essentially the property of their parents. Their parents can essentially do whatever they want, but the kids have one thing that the adults also have, which is protection. The government protects them from being harmed or killed. And then aside from that, the parents get all the say. The parents can brainwash them into a religion if they want. The parents can let them eat junk food or make them only eat vegetables. So there is a huge difference. But I think what an ideal society would have would be that protection. And I just haven't been convinced that protection shouldn't span the entire existence of the human. I feel convinced that it shouldn't protect sperm. You don't have to put people in jail for masturbating instead of trying to make as many babies as possible. But as soon as a human starts, there's something about this idea of knowing your society has this protection in place, and that it prevents anybody from killing one of the species without what we deem as good reason.
Okay, so that brings us back to the issue of, is it a human?
Well, no, not just because I think it's a human. I think because it is one of our species in motion. I'll go with the idea of not even calling it a human, but I think based on its on whatever you want to call it, that should have protection.
Okay, yeah. So then there's the issue of well, why should that have protection? Maybe we could look at the implications of, well, if we didn't protect it, such and such bad things would happen there, and we want to avoid those bad things, therefore we should protect it. And we could talk about that. But I noticed it's we've gone past 12:30. I don't know how much time you have.
About 5-10 minutes to wrap up.
Okay. Okay, so so I would want to push back on calling it a human, but then if you say, well, all right, fine, I won't call it a human, but why not protect it nonetheless? I guess because I think of the purpose of rights is enabling oneself to live a good life. So they're egoistic in their purpose, or selfish, to use a term Rand often uses. She has a distinct sense of that term, selfishness. But it's for your own benefit. And I think if you are treating the embryo as worthy of protection, such that the woman now has to undergo 9 months of pregnancy, then I would say that's not to her. That's violating her ability to live a good life. So I would say it's interfering with her rights to live the kind of life she wants. And I guess you could come back, well, what about the embryo's right to live the kind of life it wants? Well, one thing I would say is it doesn't even have a once yet. It's not even
Yeah.
conscious. So I think it's premature to think of it in that sort of way. I
Yeah,
think
no, I agree with you. I think there is reason to point out why maybe abortion is at least more all right than it isn't. Like the fact that somebody could suffer, they could go through this wear and tear of their body, all this different stuff. And then if you factor in the stages it's at, a zygote, I care a lot less about a zygote than I care about a fetus. And I care a lot less about a fetus than I care about a 1-year-old. And I actually made a chart, and it's kind of interesting to see where like 90-year-olds fit on that chart. But so I agree with you in a big sense. I think before getting into the lack of good life that this mother might have if she's not allowed to have an abortion, I would have to get to some kind of understanding on the 9-month grown fetus inside of a dead mother. And because I could see it being thought of as no value whatsoever from zygote all the way through that, if there has to be some kind of a separation. Now legal is interesting, but let's just look at a personal, you were saying that, sorry, what's the word for it? Our own ego, like we have to do it, like selfishness, which I totally agree with. But those of us that do things based on empathy and do things to help other people is because we get joy out of that. We get pleasure from helping. So if I see a baby lying in the street, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to take it somewhere to help it. It doesn't mean that legally certain people should have to do certain things, but I want to do that. So if I pick up this baby on the street and help it, I don't view it any different than if that exact same baby was inside of its dead mom on the street. Like I want to help that baby. And I'm curious, and I know on the spot it's complicated, but I would be interested to see if down the road, after analyzing it, at least in the rare case of a dead mother, if you end up feeling differently about if the baby becomes individuated once the second life is ended. And it's just something worth thinking about. I didn't think about it until like yesterday, but
I think it could just vary from case to case. Like as to whether I or anyone would value the almost born, the 9-month fetus. So like before I was saying, if you're a father and you really wanted to have a child, then I can see that you would definitely want to save that fetus and have it be born. But if you really did not want to have a child, you say you hate the idea of having a child, then I can see how you wouldn't value it at all. It would be a threat to the kind of life that you want to live. And so what egoism looks like in a given case can vary. So depending on the father's values, he might or might not want to save that fetus.
What if
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what if there's no family? There's zero connections whatsoever. It's just a matter of, does the government have something set up where they think in this case, when there's no family, do we just let the baby die out inside the mother, or do we take it out and put it up for adoption? What would you think the argument for why the government should do one or the other would be?
So I'm really thinking off the top of my head here. I guess the one thought is I don't think the government should put anyone in a position of having to do something they didn't voluntarily decide. People shouldn't have to take on unchosen obligations. So if saving this baby or saving the fetus and allowing it to be born implies that someone would then have to be responsible for taking care of it, then that's basically putting an unchosen obligation on people, which I don't think is right. So maybe the right approach here is to say the government should only save the fetus if it's got some people lined up, like parents who want to adopt kids, who maybe they want surrogate mothers to give birth to a child, and then they take it. So if they don't have anyone like that lined up to take care of the child, then maybe the right approach is to just let the fetus die. And if they do have someone lined up, then go ahead and let it be born.
Okay, I like that. And just for the sake of being challenging, because it's fun to be challenging, let's say nobody is lined up, but in this one area of our society, the government does not fund their adoption centers with taxes. Let's say the adoption center only stays open because there are people that donate. So people want protection for these babies. So people that personally care donate money. And so all the money that pays the workers that work at the adoption place, whether that baby gets adopted or not, there'll just be people there that take care of the baby until it does. It is funded willingly. So it's not putting anybody out.
Yeah, I guess if there's a center set up for this purpose that has an ongoing basis of support to keep these kids, I guess in foster care, maybe you'd call it, until they get a more permanent home, then it seems reasonable for the I don't know if the government would be the agent, but it seems reasonable to me to allow it to be born as long as there's a place which can handle it, can
Yeah,
raise it.
I agree. Yeah, I agree that would be a necessary element. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I'm glad you put up with my wild ideas. But yeah, that's probably a good place to stop it unless you had any final thoughts.
No, I think that's good. Yeah. And yeah, I brought one or two wild ideas of my own, and one being Ayn Rand's example of the immortal robot, and then also the rational spider. Although I think the way it's raised in her book, she says this is like, some professors will raise this as an objection. They often raise borderline cases and as a means to say, well, concepts are just arbitrary. What do we do in this case? And she'll end up saying it's optional, and sometimes in some cases how to classify it, although in the rational spider case it's not. But anyways, she at least entertains and provides some kind of response to this far-fetched example. She doesn't just dismiss it out of hand and doesn't say anything about it. She does have something to say about how it should be handled. So I guess I'm gaining more facility in my, or experience in my thinking about how to handle far-fetched cases as I think about this more. And I have been doing that a lot recently.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, it's good talking. If you want to talk about some other topics in the near future or the far future, let me know.
Yeah, sure. It was good. And yeah, I'm sure we could talk again sometime.
Awesome.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. Take care.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
All right.